They can simply, to put it pretty bluntly, sit there and have the rockets rain on them, or they can try to stop them. Now, with respect to the question about whether or not, what's the evidence on both sides? How would you suppose that 8,000 rockets got accidentally fired at his... Okay, on the other one, it's a good question because I have not seen any evidence. I heard the assertion that it was deliberate. I have seen no evidence. I regard the allegation that the Israelis targeted civilians for the purpose of just wantonly killing them as complete and utter garbage. I don't see any evidence of that. If there is a situation in which Soldier X pointed someone went the wrong way, or there is a there are houses where people thought that, for example, in the case of this doctor's family, it was thought that the Hamas guys were in house 1 and they were in house 2. That's the stuff that happens in war, which doesn't make the lives of those who suffer any better. It is simply to say, what in the name of all that is holy do people think is going to happen if you fire 8,000 rockets at civilian centers? You simply sit there and take it not for 8 years, but for 80 years? It's not a morally obscure issue for me. It's very clear. There's no equilibrium there. Those who fire rockets at civilians deliberately, A, are morally culpable, and B, when they do so using communities, civilians, schools, groups of schools, people and families as shields, they are clearly, as a matter of international human rights law, absolutely culpable of a human rights violation.
Omar.
The argument is that Hamas was trying to maximize the number of Israeli civilians that it wanted to kill and managed to kill 3 during the operation, and Israel was trying to avoid any Palestinian civilian casualties and managed to kill 900 or so of them. Now, in terms of, take this one example which was reported in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Israel targeted a UN compound, killing 40 Palestinians in it, and when Israel was asked why it did that, it said, oh, Palestinian rocket fire was coming out from the school. And then an IDF soldier reported to the United Nations, which was reported again in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, that actually was a lie, essentially. There was no fire that was coming out of the school. You take, in terms of evidence for the targeting of civilians, you take Reuven Pedadzor, who is strategic analyst, an Israeli strategic analyst, writing in Haaretz, the IDF, quote, I'm quoting now, the IDF, which planned to attack buildings and sites populated by hundreds of people, did not warn them in advance to leave, but intended to kill as great many of them and succeeded. And you have, after the scandal of the Israeli military printing the t-shirts with the target on the pregnant Palestinian woman with the subtitle, 1 shot, 2 kills, they said, well, what we were actually told during the operation is that we should destroy as much of the Gaza Strip as we can. Just the mountain of evidence in terms of statements by Israeli strategic analysts, and a particular one which is very important, is something that is called the Dahiya strategy. The Dahiya strategy came after the Lebanon war. When Israel attacked Lebanon in 2006 in response to the clashes with Hezbollah on the border, it had flattened the entire southern Dahiya of Beirut, where Hezbollah's headquarters is. And they decided that in the future, and now I am quoting from the Israeli newspaper Yediot Ahronot, we will wield disproportionate power against every village from which shots are fired on Israel and cause immense damage and destruction. IDF's Northern Command Chief, Gadi Essi, I can't pronounce his name.
Ashkenazi.
No, it's E-I-S-E-N-K-O-T, Isenkot, explained, this isn't a suggestion, he quotes, this is a plan that has already been authorized. In the event of hostilities, Israel needed to act immediately, decisively, and with force that is disproportionate. Of course, disproportionate force is illegal under international law. Such a response aims at inflicting damage and meting out punishment to the extent that will demand long and expensive reconstruction processes. And when you look at the fact that entire neighborhoods were wiped out in the Gaza Strip, it's quite clear that Israel intended to cause severe damage to the civilian population in the Gaza Strip.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Yes, in the front. Go ahead.
Respond to that, please, the comment that the disproportional...
Yes, happy to.
No, there's the comment by an Israeli official
Yeah.
terming that as part of its policy.
I don't know about the quote. I do know that this is what the President of the International Court of Justice has written.
Well, I'm telling you about the quote right now.
May I, you want to let me finish the question? Would you do that for me? let me finish the question. Finish answering the question. What she has written is that proportionality has to be in relation to the overall legitimate objective of ending the aggression. So let me ask, what would be a proportionate response to 8 years of rocket fire? Would it be 8 years of fire launched at Gaza? What might be the proportionate response to 8,000 rockets? Would it be 8,000 rockets? I mean, think about it. If you are concerned about proportionality, why don't we simply eliminate any need for any rockets at all? Simply stop firing the rockets at the Israeli civilians. Then you can deprive anyone of any ability. These families in southern Israel aren't doing anything to anybody. They're not in Gaza. They're not building settlements. You're concerned about human rights, aren't you? You must be dreadfully upset about their lives. And I should think that what you would do, because you're concerned about human rights, is say, well, let's see. The first thing that has to happen is these rockets have to stop, and I will unequivocally stop them, and that will eliminate any issue about what's proportional. Any issue. And if you're concerned about that, that's what you'll say.
If I may
That's his answer,
briefly.
obviously. Go ahead, quickly. Yes, Alicia?
I'm just curious if Mr. Robbins was in the room when I mentioned the fact that Israel was put under an unlawful siege and that Israel repeatedly violated the ceasefire, which then caused the rockets to come out.
Well,
I'm just curious if you were
I
here
was
for that.
absolutely in the room, and in fact, it is not the case that Israel violated the truce. It is the case that Hamas violated the truce. But you know what? We don't have to worry about November, December of 2008, because we had rockets that were coming out of Gaza, in fact, long before 2000, but uninterruptedly from 2000 to 2008, when there was no truce.
Questions among the students? Yes, go ahead. You'll be first. Go ahead.
I would like to ask both of them quickly for their take on two very quick related points. One, I know that the Hamas charters does not recognize Israel, and I know that they also do not recognize Jewish sovereignty. I know that the Hamas website says, and this has been testified before the U.S. Congress, it says on Hamas's websites that we will knock on heaven's doors with the skulls of Jews, implying that in order to gain access to heaven, they need to kill Jews. And the second part is, what is wrong
You don't find that
about...
progressive?
What's that?
You don't find that progressive, I guess.
Right, not very progressive. And so my other question is, what is wrong about Jewish people living in the West Bank? Why can't Jews live in the West Bank as a principle?
Your question is to Omar.
What's that? Mostly to Omar, but I'd like both of them to touch on it.
On the question of Hamas, indeed, the Hamas charter does contain a lot of problematic language, but it is also a fact that Khalid Mish'al, the head of Hamas in Syria, had an interview on Al Jazeera English in which he explicitly said that he's in favor of a two-state solution. He's got an op-ed in the London Guardian. Several Hamas officials have even op-eds in the Washington Post saying that they're in favor of a two-state solution. If only you were to read those on a regular basis, and if only we were able to have unmitigated access to that kind of information, you would know this. You should ask yourself why you don't know the fact that they have published these op-eds. And it is also the case, I just told you that the charter does indeed have problematic language.
He acknowledges that.
It is also the case, it is also the case that former President Jimmy Carter had recently come back with a pledge from Hamas not to disrupt the two-state solution if the majority of Palestinians accepted it, and the majority of Palestinians do accept it. Now you can refer to the Hamas language that is problematic about not accepting Israel, or you could look at Israel systematically destroying Palestinian society. And I think that actions are far more important than mere words, and this is what you should be looking at.
I also...
do you
One
mind-
sec, he's not
Oh, is that
finished.
finished?
There's the second part. Can you remind me of the second part very briefly?
And can Jewish people live in Gaza and the West Bank?
Yes, Jewish people are more than welcome to live in the Gaza and the West Bank, but not as settlers. You cannot make that part of Israel when that does not belong to Israel. I know many Jewish peace activists who go to Palestine on a regular basis, and they say that they don't feel as welcome anywhere in the world as they are when they are in Palestinian homes. And the reason that they are Jewish and they get to say this is because they are not illegal settlers who are taking the domestic population's land and resources and water and then inviting the Israeli military to come design roads that are specific only for them and so on. So yes, they can stay, you just can't claim that this is part of Israel, which is exactly what Israel does when it builds those settlements and then sends its military force to be in those areas. Chinese people have the right to live in the United States, but if China started taking over, carving up parts of the US and saying that these are Chinese settlements, that Americans are not allowed into, then that would be a problem. And this is the problem with the settlements.